So today, we're going to talk about a story that, well, it's often forgotten. It's a story about compassion when things were at their absolute worst. A single choice made at this one critical moment that ended up saving hundreds of thousands of lives.
I mean, that's a question that's almost impossible to even think about, right? But here's the thing. Back in the late 1970s, this wasn't just some thought experiment. For the country of Thailand, it was a sudden, overwhelming, and very real crisis. And that dilemma, well, that's what's at the heart of what we're talking about today.
Because when faced with this just unimaginable horror, one nation, dealing with its own problems, made a choice. It chose to keep its gates open. All right, let's really get into this.
But to really get why that choice was so monumental, we've got to understand the crisis itself. We need to rewind, back to the moment this dark shadow fell over Southeast Asia.
You know, the world was just watching in horror as the Khmer Rouge regime seized power in Cambodia. And what came next? It was a period of such intense brutality and suffering. It's truly one of the absolute darkest chapters in modern history.
And it all happened so fast, it was just brutal. Phnom Penh falls in April 75, and boom, the Khmer Rouge immediately starts this radical, violent takeover of the entire country. For 4 straight years, it was just terror. And that's what led to this massive, massive exodus of people who were just desperate to get out.
The term killing fields, it became the terrifying symbol of this whole era. And you've got to understand, this wasn't just a war, it was a genocide. Millions of people were targeted, and hundreds of thousands fled with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs and the trauma of what they'd seen. Their only hope? Just get to the border.
And that's where the neighbor comes in. Because as all these people were fleeing to the Thai border, Thailand suddenly had this impossible choice on its hands.
I mean, really, try to put yourself in their shoes. This wasn't some wealthy, stable superpower we're talking about. Thailand was a developing country, struggling with its own security, its own economy, and then, bam, a humanitarian crisis of absolutely epic proportions lands right on its doorstep.
And what's so wild is just the sheer mismatch. On one hand, you've got Thailand's reality, a developing nation, limited resources, right? And on the other, you have a crisis that needed this huge response, a response that would honestly challenge any country on Earth.
So here's the thing. They acted. The UN asked for help, and driven by what sources say was this deep-rooted sense of just human duty, Thailand did it. They let the refugees cross the border, they started setting up temporary camps, they became the main sanctuary for people running from the genocide.
And this decision, this choice to help, it wasn't some quick fix. No way. It was the start of a humanitarian operation that would last for 20 years. An operation that literally built sanctuaries of hope from nothing. Okay, just look at this number. 363,061. That is the official count of people who found safety in Thailand and were eventually able to go home. Every single one of those numbers is a life, a family that got a second chance. And this is where that hope really took root. Places with names like Khao Dang, Sakyo, and Site 2, they became almost legendary. And these weren't just a few tents, you know? They were massive, sprawling, makeshift cities built for one purpose, to keep people alive. And just to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, at its peak, Site 2 was the largest refugee settlement in all of Southeast Asia. It was a colossal undertaking, a whole city of survivors right there on this really unstable border.
And this is so important, because it wasn't just about giving people a place to sleep. The whole point of these camps was to provide a future. They built schools for the kids. They offered job training so the adults could learn skills they could use to one day go back and rebuild their own country.
And just think about this. This whole thing didn't last for a month or even a year. We're talking about a massive humanitarian effort that Thailand and its partners kept going for over 20 years. I mean, that is a truly remarkable long-term commitment.
Of course, the end goal was always to get the refugees back home, safely. But that last chapter of the story, that was a whole other massive challenge in itself.
Yeah, the road home was long, and it was dangerous. For a decade, the fighting kept spilling over the border. Thai soldiers actually died defending the land where these camps stood. But then, finally, in 1991, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. And that opened up a path to peace, and a path back home.
Now this final step, it just couldn't have happened without some serious teamwork. The Thai government worked right alongside the UNHCR, that's the UN Refugee Agency, to plan and pull off the safe return of all those hundreds of thousands of people. And the result of all that work? It became the largest repatriation operation in the entire history of the United Nations. Just let that sink in. An effort on a scale that had never been seen before, and it was a success. All of it, born from a crisis that started with so much death and despair.
So when you look back at all this, what's the takeaway? Well, it's a story of just incredible compassion from a neighbor. It's a story of real sacrifice, not just from the international community, but from Thailand itself. And you know what? It's a huge lesson in what global responsibility really looks like.
And that brings us right back to where we started. This whole story, this forgotten sanctuary, it really makes you ask a pretty simple but powerful question. In a world that seems to be building more and more walls and closing more doors, what does it really mean to be a neighbor?